Hello, this resource for supervisors as well as postgraduate writing coaches looks at the issue of formative feedback and how to offer postgraduate students feedback that feeds forward towards learning, reflection, and improved writing and thinking in further drafts. The kind of feedback we are talking about here is termed formative feedback. Formative feedback is broadly defined as feedback that helps a writer to reconsider mistakes, missteps, omissions, and so on in ways that enhance their learning about writing. It has no judgment or mark attached to it, but rather creates a space in which the current work can be discussed, rethought, and revised. It doesn't focus on minor issues like spelling and grammar, but rather focuses on structure, organization of ideas, misconceptions, and misrepresentations of theory or research, and so on, so that students can address these conceptual issues as they develop their thesis argument and postgraduate researcher voice. Ideally, formative feedback in a postgraduate student-supervisor relationship happens over an extended period of time in the form of an ongoing conversation that builds towards a finished thesis. In the screencast that follows, the speaker is going to illustrate one way of giving formative feedback in electronic form on student writing that can be adapted to your context as a supervisor, either in verbal or written form. This is a screencast highlighting examples of feedback conversations between supervisors and students and suggesting this kind of exchange as a tool you could use to give your own students formative feedback that helps them to make changes to their writing and at the same time enables meta-learning about their research project at master's or PhD level. In other words, your feedback can help them both improve their writing draft by draft and become more insightful and reflective writers.
This screencast highlights examples of the feedback conversations or feedback exchanges that we are discussing in this video. The first starts here in comment number 26, where the supervisor makes a comment for the student to consider. The student, in the next draft, then responds, both in her writing and in the comment bubble, to indicate that she has attempted to respond to this comment, but she's not sure whether or not she's managed to achieve it. The supervisor then responds again in blue, indicating that the student could go and look at somebody else's thesis, one that is similar to the one she is trying to write, for an idea of how to further consider bringing context into her study. As we continue scrolling down, you can see that there are a couple of other feedback conversations going on. Here, for example, initiated by the student, who asks a question in red, which is then responded to by the supervisors in blue, giving her both a piece of advice as well as further reading to go and look at and think about. Not all of the feedback in this draft is occurring in these kinds of conversations. Some of it does simply indicate a correction of a spelling mistake or a word that is being misused. Not all feedback has to occur in these kinds of conversations. However, the point that we want to highlight here is that the feedback doesn't simply point out to students that something is incorrect or that something needs to be changed or rewritten in a certain way. Rather, it tries wherever possible to ask questions, to give explanations of why the supervisor is lost or confused, or why the supervisor wants to highlight a particular problem. It highlights, for example, points that they should talk about when they meet in person. And it argues with the student. It says to the student, but hang on a second, think about this, think about this. It doesn't simply focus on the writing itself. It also focuses on the development of the student's argument and the development of the student's thinking. What we want to argue here is that feedback that occurs in a conversation where the student is invited to not only argue back, speak back, defend their position against the points that the supervisor is highlighting, but then also further work on those in other drafts and indicate what they have and haven't been able to do and ask questions, changes the dialogue between the student and supervisor, brings the student into a more reflective position on their writing, and enables the student not only to improve their piece of writing, but also to improve as a thinker and a writer going forwards.
It is time-consuming to give formative feedback to students that opens a conversation and offers advice, insight, or choices for them to consider, rather than simply pointing out mistakes or problems without the suggestions and explanations. It might well be easier and quicker in many cases to just tell them what to write or what to do to fix the mistakes. But crucially, while this may result in a finished MA or PhD thesis, it won't necessarily create an environment in which postgraduate students can become more conscious, reflective writers and thinkers who can continue learning and growing after they have completed their studies. At PhD level especially, we should be seeing students who desire to continue working in academia as its future researchers, writers, and supervisors. Thus, our feedback to them now, during the PhD, needs to be about more than just finishing the thesis. It needs to be directed towards modeling a process of doing research so that they can learn about this process and also produce its end product, the dissertation, successfully. Formative feedback that enables learning about research and the thinking, reading, writing, organization of ideas, development of arguments, and so on can better enable current students to grow into more capable independent researchers and new supervisors post-PhD.